Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the life and ideas of one of history's most influential thinkers, Aristotle. I mean, his work is the foundation for everything from biology to formal logic, and his intellectual shadow, it stretches all the way to our present day. So let's kick things off with this incredible image described here by the historian Will Durant. It's from Raphael's masterpiece, The School of Athens. Right there in the middle, you've got the two giants of Greek philosophy. Plato, the teacher, he's pointing up to the heavens, to the world of perfect ideas and abstract concepts. But his greatest student, Aristotle, look at his hand. It's gesturing firmly toward the ground, to the real, tangible, observable world right in front of us. That single gesture, it tells you everything you need to know about Aristotle's entire philosophy. It's all about focusing on the reality we can actually see and touch and understand. All right, so here's our game plan. First, we're going to meet the man himself. Then, we'll unpack the tools he literally invented for thinking clearly. We'll see how he used those tools to study the science of life, dive into his super practical guide for living a good life, and finally, we'll try to wrap our heads around his monumental legacy. So first up, who was this guy, really? Turns out his life was just as remarkable as his ideas. Okay, so he was born way back in 384 BCE. He starts his journey at Plato's famous academy in Athens and spends, get this, 20 years there as the star student. But then his path takes this wild turn and he gets called to tutor a kid who's destined for greatness, Alexander the Great. After that, he goes back to Athens and starts his own school, the Lyceum, which became this powerhouse of research that would literally change the world. His life, though, it didn't end in glory, but in political exile. And his impact on young Alexander? It was profound. The historian Plutarch tells us that Alexander felt that while his father, the king, gave him life, it was Aristotle who taught him how to live. Just think about that for a second. Shaping the mind of the man who would go on to conquer and completely redraw the map of the known world. But here's this incredible contrast, right? While Alexander is out there building an empire of land and power with armies, Aristotle is building an empire of the mind. One guy is using violence and strategy to control the physical world. The other is using observation and reason to understand it. You gotta wonder, in the long run, which conquest really had the bigger impact? Okay, so that brings us to one of his biggest contributions, and I mean, this one is a total game changer, the creation of a system for thinking itself. Before Aristotle, logic was, well, it was a mess. He's the one who decided to put it all in order. At the heart of this whole system is something called the syllogism. Now, I know, the word sounds a little complicated, but the idea behind it is actually incredibly simple and super powerful. It's basically a recipe for an argument. It's a way to get from what you already know to a conclusion that has to be true, if your starting points are true. This was revolutionary. For the first time, there was a clear, universal tool to tell the difference between a good argument and just hot air. And just look how elegant this is. You start with a big, general statement, the major premise. Canines have 4 legs. Then you add a specific fact that fits, the minor premise. Frank is a canine. Now, if both of those are true, the conclusion is just undeniable. It wasn't about some kind of magic trick to find new truths. It was about building rock-solid arguments and making your own thinking crystal clear. And he didn't just stop with the syllogism, nope. Across 6 major works, which we now call the organon, or the instrument, he built the entire system from the ground up. He covered the whole shebang, from basic statements to spotting logical fallacies. He basically invented the field of formal logic, all by himself, creating a discipline that would dominate Western thought for centuries. So Aristotle has these incredible new tools for thinking. What's he do with them? He points them right at the tangible, living world all around him. In a lot of ways, he was the world's first great biologist. And you really have to stop and appreciate the challenge he was up against. I mean, we have to remember the context here. He was doing all of this without any of the tools we just take for granted. No watch, no thermometer, no telescope. His main instruments were his own 2 eyes, his own sharp mind, and this relentless curiosity. And yet, even with those massive limitations, what he managed to pull off is just staggering. Using just his own observations, he gave us the first scientific breakdown of the water cycle. He studied animal anatomy and was the first to classify humans as mammals. By carefully opening up chicken eggs at different stages, he basically founded the science of embryology. He was a pioneer in every sense of the word, cataloging the world with brand new eyes. And this quote? This is pure Aristotle. It gets right to the heart of his scientific spirit. For him, real knowledge didn't just come from thinking in a quiet room. No, it came from getting your hands dirty, from watching things closely, and from seeing how they develop right from the very beginning. So, after mapping out the rules of thought and the mechanics of life, Aristotle turns his incredible mind inward. He starts asking one of the biggest questions of all: how do we live a good life? And his answer starts with a pretty simple but powerful idea. Think about it. Everything we do, whether we're trying to get famous, have fun, or get smarter, it's all a means to an end. And what's that ultimate end? That one thing we want just for its own sake. According to Aristotle, it's happiness. Okay, so how do we get happy? Well, this is where he introduces this brilliant idea called the golden mean. He argued that virtue, the good stuff, isn't an extreme. It's the perfect balance point right in the middle of two vices. So take a look. Courage, that's the virtue. It's the mean between the deficiency of being a coward and the excess of being totally reckless. It's all about finding that sweet spot in every situation. And here's the real kicker. This wasn't about a one-time choice. For Aristotle, excellence isn't an act. It's a habit. I mean, this quote says it all, right? You don't become happy or virtuous overnight. It's something you have to work on, something you build through consistent right actions over your entire life. All right, let's wrap this up by looking at his final years and how all this work built a legacy that is, well, it's almost hard to comprehend. So after Alexander the Great dies, the whole political scene in Athens shifts, and suddenly Aristotle is in the crosshairs. He gets accused of blasphemy, the same charge that got Socrates killed decades earlier. But Aristotle chose exile, and his reason was just chilling. He said he didn't want to allow the Athenians to sin twice against philosophy. He died in exile just 1 year later. And this down-to-earth practical approach, he applied it to politics too. He wasn't some idealist dreaming up a perfect society. Nope. He looked at the real governments around him, and he didn't just see their strengths. He saw how they were doomed to fall apart. He saw how a monarchy, ruled by one good person, eventually rots into tyranny. How an aristocracy, ruled by the best, decays into a system run only by the rich. And how democracy's core idea, that everyone is equal, can become its fatal flaw if it's not balanced. But his death, well, that was just the beginning. I want you to let this number sink in. For more than 1,000 years, if you were studying almost anything in Europe, you were studying Aristotle. He wasn't just a philosopher. For a very long time, he was the philosopher. His ideas were the unquestioned bedrock of knowledge for generation after generation. So that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We live in an age of just information overload, right? We're drowning in misinformation, hot takes, and angry debates. Aristotle gave us the basic toolkit for clear, structured, rational thought. And you have to wonder, in our noisy, complicated world, maybe that ancient toolkit is exactly what we need most.